Poachers broke into the forester's house, not knowing who was guarding him. What is scarier in the remote taiga in winter? Bitter cold, a hungry wolf, or a human being? Yegor Matveyevich Kuzmich, who had lived in the forest for 72 years, knew the answer. You can endure the cold by the stove. You can negotiate with a wolf if you look it in the eye without fear or malice. But a man who had come to the taiga with a black heart, was more terrifying than any natural disaster or beast. He leaned his palm against the warm brick wall, behind which a huge creature snored loudly and steadily. The wall vibrated with each exhalation. "Sleep, Mikhail. Sleep," whispered the old man, addressing not a man, but someone who was dearer to him than any family. In the dim light of the hut, lit only by the flames in the stove, Kuzmic's old but sharp blue eyes flashed. A blizzard howled outside the window. But that wasn't the sound that disturbed him. He heard another sound, a distant, unfamiliar, ragged crackling of a snowmobile approaching his hut, a place that strangers were not supposed to know about. Before we continue, let us know which city you are from. We are interested to know where our videos are being watched from. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your rating. This motivates us to make new and interesting videos. Well, let's get started. Yegor Matveyevich was not a simple hermit. He was a guardian, and now he felt how uninvited guests were disturbing the centuries-old peace of his domain. He slowly got up, his bones creaking like old pine trees in the wind. He walked over to the wall, where his old but perfectly maintained IZH rifle hung. His fingers, gnarled and hard as cedar roots, habitually rested on the cold wood of the stock. He was not afraid. Fear had long since been frozen out of him by the taiga. But he was ready to fight to the death for the one who slept behind the wall. The snowmobile fell silent about half a kilometer from the house. They walked on foot, covering their tracks. Professionals. That was the worst part. Kuzmich extinguished the kerosene lamp. The hut was plunged into darkness, broken only by the red glow from the stove. He froze by the window, becoming part of the shadows. He waited. The taiga had taught him the most important thing: patience. 300 meters from the hut, 3 men in camouflage lay in the snow. The oldest, Viktor Belov, nicknamed Lame, was looking at the hut through binoculars. He was 51 years old, and he had spent most of them taking what did not belong to him from the taiga. His weather-beaten, angry face twisted into a smirk. "There's smoke, so the old man is home," he croaked, without looking away from his binoculars. Next to him lay Nikolai Volkov, Kolyan, a huge, dull-witted 38-year-old whose only function was to carry out orders. The third was Sasha Orlov, the youngest, barely 25. He was trembling, but not from the cold, but from fear and disgust at what they were doing. "Victor, maybe we should just leave him. Just walk past him," he whispered. The lame man slowly lowered his binoculars and stared at him with icy eyes. "Walk past him? We have food for one day, no fuel. And this old man, I tell you, has enough supplies for the whole winter. And he definitely has a gun. So shut up, Sasha. You got yourself into this, and now you'll do what I say. Your mother is waiting for her medicine." The mention of his mother made Sasha cringe and fall silent. This was his cage, a debt that Victor had placed on him, and one that he could only work off here in this frozen hell. Victor raised his binoculars again. He saw the door of the hut open and an old man step out onto the threshold. Thin, tall, wearing an old sheepskin coat. An old man like any other, easy prey. Kuzmich stood there for a moment, looking around as if sniffing the air. then took a pair of wide hunting skis from the wall and disappeared into the forest, moving in the opposite direction. Perfect, Victor exhaled. Let's go check the tracks. At least 3 hours. Kolyan, Sasha, follow me. Quickly and quietly. Let's get to work. They got up and, crouching low, moved toward the house. Kolyan went first, breaking through the snow with his weight. Sasha trailed behind, his heart pounding in his throat. He looked at the small, cozy house with smoke curling from its chimney and felt like the lowest of the low. He didn't want this. He wanted to go back to his city, to his sick mother, to his poor but honest life. But the way back was cut off by Victor's hoarse voice, who was already standing at the door and gesturing for him to hurry up. The door was locked with a simple wooden bolt from the inside. This was no obstacle for Kolyan. He leaned his shoulder against it once, then twice, and with a dry crack, the door gave way, revealing the dark interior of the hut. The warm smell of wood, stove smoke, and something else, something wild, animalistic, hit his nose. Ugh, it stinks of dog. Looks like he keeps a dog. Victor grimaced as he entered. Kolyan, find something to eat quickly. Sasha, stand guard by the window. I'll look around. The hut was small but lived in. Against the wall stood a bed covered with a patchwork quilt, a table, a couple of benches, and a large Russian stove, which gave off heat. Kolyan immediately rushed to the wooden cupboard in the corner, anticipating his prize. Victor went deeper into the room. His professional eye immediately spotted what he had come for: a carbine hanging on wooden hooks on the wall, an old but well-maintained SKS. Next to it was a cartridge belt. The lame man took the weapon and weighed it in his hand with satisfaction. Now the game would be played by his rules. Sasha stood at the window, peering into the forest where the old man had gone. The blizzard was getting worse, the snow was falling thick and fast, and visibility was dropping. He prayed that the forester would get lost, freeze to death, anything, just so long as he didn't come back now. At that moment, from the corner where Kolyan was already gutting the supplies, came his surprised exclamation. "Victor, come here, look." Victor approached, still holding his rifle. Kolyan was holding a huge wooden bowl, about 10 liters in size. It was filled with steamed berries, oats, and generously drizzled with honey. "Is this for the dog? Grandpa feeds his mutt like a king," Kolyan muttered. Victor ran his finger along the edge of the bowl, picked up a drop of honey, and put it in his mouth. "Not for the dog," he said thoughtfully. "Even a wolfhound couldn't eat a portion like that. Something's not right here." He looked around the room more carefully. His gaze fell on the wall next to the stove. There was another door there. Low, rough, nailed together from thick planks, and locked from the outside with a massive bolt. It did not lead to the street, but to some kind of extension. That was where the thick, animalistic smell was coming from. "What kind of kennel is this?" Victor asked himself. "Kolyan, open it." Kolyan approached and pulled on the bolt. It wouldn't budge. "It's stuck," he grunted. "Break it," Victor ordered curtly, raising his rifle and aiming at the door. Something inside Sasha screamed, "Run!" He felt an irrational, clinging horror emanating from that low door. He wanted to shout at them to stop, to get out of there. But the words stuck in his throat. Kolyan swung his leg and kicked the door. The wood groaned dully but held. He kicked again, with a furious roar. At that very moment, a sound came from behind the door. Not a dog barking, not a wolf growling. It was a low, guttural, vibrating rumble that made the floorboards tremble beneath their feet. It was full of sleepy discontent and hidden power, capable of tearing the world apart. Kolyan recoiled, his face stretched with surprise and fear. "Victor, there," he began. "Don't piss yourself, boar. Maybe it's wild," Victor hissed. But fear also flashed in his eyes. He didn't lower his rifle. And then a new sound came from behind the door. A dull thud from inside, then another, louder. The thick planks shook violently. The wooden bolt holding the door began to creak. Sasha backed toward the exit, his hand finding the cold handle of the broken front door. He realized that they had awakened something that had been sleeping. Something huge and very, very evil. A sudden blizzard caught Yegor Matveyevich 5 kilometers from home. The wind howled in the cedar trees, throwing handfuls of stinging snow in his face. Visibility dropped to 10 meters. The old man realized that he had to return, and immediately. The anxiety that had been gnawing at his soul since morning had now turned into alarm. He wasn't thinking about himself. He was thinking about Misha. He turned his skis around and, barely seeing the road, went back to the hut on instinct alone. He moved quickly, as fast as he could for his age, driven by a bad premonition. When he finally saw the familiar smoke from the chimney through the snowy veil, his heart calmed down for a moment. But as he got closer, he noticed something that shouldn't have been there. Fresh, as yet unnoticed footprints of several people leading straight to his door. And the door itself. It was ajar and hanging on one hinge. Yegor snatched his rifle from his shoulder. He didn't know how many there were or what they wanted. But he knew that his home was his fortress, and his only friend was sleeping in that fortress. He took a step onto the porch, and at that moment the door swung open. Kolyan was standing on the threshold with a sack of flour on his shoulder. Seeing the forester with a rifle, he hesitated for a second, then roared and threw the sack at the old man. Yegor managed to step back, but the sack still knocked him off his feet. He fell into a snowdrift, his rifle flying off to the side. Before he could get up, Victor rushed out of the hut with a carbine in his hands. He kicked Yegor's rifle far away into the snow and pointed the barrel at the old man. "Quiet, old man. Be quiet and you'll live," hissed the lame one. His eyes burned with cold triumph. Kolyan lifted Yegor and roughly pushed him into the hut. Sasha stood aside, pale as a sheet. Yegor was thrown onto a bench and his hands were quickly tied with rope. "Well, hello, master." Victor smiled, pacing in front of him. "Weren't expecting guests? We're cold and hungry. Decided to drop in for a visit." Yegor was silent. He looked at Victor without fear, with icy contempt. But his whole being was tense. He was listening. He was listening to the sounds behind the low door to the annex. It was quiet there. Too quiet. "Why are you silent, old man? Thinking about where you're hiding your furs? Or the money from the sale?" Victor poked Yegor in the shoulder with the barrel of his rifle. "Tell us where the stash is, and we'll leave peacefully." Yegor slowly raised his eyes. "Get out of here," he said quietly but firmly. "Leave before it's too late." Victor burst out laughing. "He's threatening us. Hear that, Kolyan? Grandpa's threatening us." But his laughter died away, because at that moment, the same low, vibrating rumbling came from behind the low door again. Only now it was different. There was no sleepiness in it. It was awakened, cold fury. The noise in the hut, the shouting, the smell of strangers. All of this seeped through the thick boards and woke the master of the taiga. "What's going on in there, Grandpa?" Victor asked tensely, nodding toward the door. Yegor looked him straight in the eye. "There's someone there you'd better not see." That was the last straw. Victor's rage and greed outweighed his caution. "Kolyan, stop this circus. Break down the door. Let's see what kind of beast Grandpa's hiding from us. Maybe the skin is valuable. Sasha stepped forward. Victor, don't. He said to leave. Shut up, barked the lame one. Do as I say, Kolyan. Kolyan, no longer so confident, approached the door and swung his leg again. He kicked, and in response, a deafening roar came from inside. A roar so full of primal power that it made all three of their ears ring. And then something hit the door from the other side. Not a foot. Something weighing half a ton. The door, made of thick planks, flew out of the opening along with the jamb like a cork from a champagne bottle. A huge dark figure rose in the doorway, shrouded in clouds of frosty steam. It was not a boar, nor was it a wolf. A giant brown bear stepped into the hut, barely fitting through the doorway. It slowly rose onto its hind legs, its head almost touching the ceiling. Its wet black nose caught scents, its small eyes burned with rage. Saliva dripped from its fangs. The hair on its mane stood on end. It let out a second roar that made the window panes rattle. Kolyan, who was standing closest to it, froze, turning into a statue. The can of stew he hadn't had time to open fell from his hands. Sasha stumbled backward until his back was pressed against the cold wall. He couldn't breathe. Death itself stood before him in the form of a beast. Only Victor, the lame one, recovered from the initial shock. The fear in his eyes was replaced by a predatory, frenzied excitement. A bear, he gasped. Shatoon. In winter. What a jackpot. He raised his rifle, aiming at the beast's head. He didn't see the animal. He saw money, huge money for a unique winter pelt. But he didn't have time to shoot. The bear, seeing the bound Yegor and the people with weapons, didn't wait. He didn't rush at them mindlessly. He took one step forward, a powerful, heavy step, and stood. He simply stood between the poachers and his man, completely blocking their access to Yegor. He didn't attack. He was protecting. He looked at Victor, and in that look, there was nothing but a cold promise of death to anyone who made another move toward the old man. The hut turned into a powder keg. 3 armed men, 1 old man, and a huge bear. And outside the window, a blizzard howled, cutting off all their retreat routes. They were trapped, in a trap they had set for themselves. Yegor, overcoming the pain in his bound hands, said quietly, I told you. Leave. This is Misha's house. Victor slowly lowered his rifle, but did not let go of it. So that's who's protecting you, old man, he hissed. Well, that makes the hunt all the more interesting. He looked at Kolyan and Sasha. His gaze was commanding. The situation had reached an impasse, and there was only one way out. A bloody one. The silence that followed Victor's words was thicker and more frightening than the howling blizzard outside the window. It rang in their ears. In this silence, everything could be heard. The crackling of logs in the stove, Sasha's frightened, ragged breathing, Kolyan's heavy sniffling, and the low, rumbling growl coming from the bear's powerful chest. Misha didn't move. He stood like a granite rock, a living wall between his man and the threat. His small, intelligent eyes never left Victor, the shiny barrel of the rifle in his hands. Sasha felt a cold sweat running down his back. He had seen wild animals in the forest, but this was different. This bear's gaze was meaningful. There was no blind rage in it, but rather a cold, measured determination. He wasn't just ready to kill. He was assessing, waiting, choosing the moment. Kolyan, pressed against the wall, was trembling slightly. His ostentatious bravado had evaporated without a trace. He looked at the bear like a rabbit looks at a boa constrictor, unable to take his eyes off the huge black claws on its paws. claws capable of tearing a person from throat to groin with a single blow. Viktor Belov was the only one who kept his composure. Fear mixed with adrenaline and greed, turning into a poisonous cocktail of hunting excitement. He slowly, millimeter by millimeter, moved the barrel of his rifle, studying the beast. Head, chest. Where to shoot? A 7.62 WEC-39 cartridge might not penetrate the thick skull. The heart? There was a chance. But if he missed, the wounded bear would tear the hut to pieces along with them. "Grandpa," Viktor said quietly, keeping his eyes on Misha. "Call your dog. Tell him to lie down." Yegor Matveyevich smiled crookedly, as much as the ropes pulling his lips together would allow. "He's not your dog, you fool. And he only understands one thing. You're a threat. Drop the gun." "So he can eat me? How clever," Viktor hissed. He understood that the situation was a stalemate. Attacking the beast in a confined space was suicide. Waiting for it to leave was foolish. It wouldn't go anywhere while the old man was there. Retreat? Viktor Kromoy never retreated. Never. It was beneath his dignity. He had to take control. He looked at Kolyan. "Kolyan, can you hear me?" Kolyan blinked fearfully, unable to take his eyes off the bear. "I can hear you," he squeaked. "The stove," Viktor continued just as quietly. "There are embers in the stove. Take the biggest one and throw it at him. Understand? Distract him for a second, and I'll put a bullet right in his side, under his shoulder blade." The plan was simple and cruel. Kolyan was to be the executor. The burly man's face contorted with horror. The stove was 2 steps away from the bear. To get the ember, he had to enter its attack zone. I can't," he stammered. "He'll do what I said," Viktor barked in a whisper, his voice ringing with steel. "Or I'll shoot you myself, like a mangy dog. You owe me, remember?" The threat worked. For a moment, his fear of Viktor outweighed his fear of the beast. Kolyan licked his dry lips and slowly began to move sideways toward the stove. Each step was accompanied by a low, warning growl from Misha. The fur on the bear's neck stood up even higher. He tensed, ready to pounce. "Don't," came Yegor's calm but authoritative voice. "Misha, quiet. Quiet, son." The bear glanced at the old man for a moment, and his growl became a little quieter. He trusted that voice, but he kept his eyes on Kolyan, who was trying to open the stove door with trembling hands. "And you fool, stop," said Yegor, looking at Kolyan. "You'll only make him angry. He's not a crank. He grew up with me. He's smart. He understands that you are enemies. Put your weapons away, sit down on the bench, and he won't touch you. We'll wait out the blizzard, and then you can leave." "Shut up, old man," Viktor interrupted him. "Tell your fairy tales to your grandmother. Kolyan, come on." Sasha, who had been silent until then, suddenly stepped forward. "Viktor, listen to him. He's telling the truth. We just broke into his house. He's defending himself. Let's leave, huh? We'll take some food and go. We'll wait out the blizzard somewhere." Viktor turned his head sharply and stared at Sasha with a look full of rage. "One more word, puppy, and I'll rip your tongue out. Have you forgotten why you're here? Your mother is waiting for medicine, not your sniveling. And medicine costs money. And right now, you have a fortune in front of you. Fur, bile, paws. It's enough for a year of comfortable living. So shut your mouth and watch the men work." Kolyan finally opened the oven door. The heat hit him in the face. He grabbed a poker and hooked a smoldering, smoking birch stump. The bear, seeing the fire in the man's hands, let out a deep growl. He hated fire. It was instinct. He crouched down, preparing to pounce. "Now!" Viktor shouted, raising his rifle. The whole scene froze for a split second. Kolyan, swinging the burning log, Victor, aiming at the bear's side, Sasha, watching the scene in horror, and Yegor, whose eyes darkened with anger and helplessness. "Misha!" he shouted. And at that moment, Kolyan threw the log, but his hand trembled with fear. The burning log did not reach the bear. It hit the wall next to him and, bouncing off, fell onto an old bearskin rug that served as a mat by the stove. The dry, grease-soaked fur burst into flames instantly, like gunpowder. A bright flame shot up to the ceiling. The shot rang out at the same time as the flash of fire. But Victor's attention was distracted by the fire for a split second, and that was enough. The bullet, intended for the bear's heart, hit its powerful hind paw. Misha roared, but it was not a roar of pain. It was a roar of rage. Rage that had been held back only by years of living alongside humans. Now all restraining factors had been swept away. Pain, fire, the threat to his master, everything merged into one instinct: to destroy. He did not rush at Victor, who was standing furthest away. His target was the one who was closest, the one who had thrown fire at him. With one lightning-fast movement, imperceptible to the eye, he lunged at Kolyan. The big man didn't even have time to scream. A huge paw with extended claws struck him in the chest. There was a sickening crunch of breaking ribs and the crack of tearing fabric. Kolyan was thrown back like a rag doll. He hit his head against the wall and went limp, leaving a bloody mark on the log wall. While Victor, stunned by such speed and power, tried to reload his rifle, ejecting the hot shell, the bear was already turning toward him. The fire in the corner was blazing, filling the hut with acrid smoke. Sasha, paralyzed with horror, stared at Kolyan's motionless body and the pool of blood spreading beneath him. He realized that it was over. They had awakened not just a beast. They had awakened the taiga itself. And now it had come for them. Misha, leaning on his wounded paw, slowly, inexorably, like a tank, moved toward Victor. He no longer growled. He breathed heavily, hoarsely, and that sound was more terrifying than any roar. Victor feverishly clicked the bolt, driving in a new cartridge. He raised the rifle, but his hands were shaking. The excitement was gone. Only a sticky, primal horror remained. He looked into the eyes of death approaching him. There was no time to aim. Victor fired from the hip. The bullet whistled, ricocheting off the brickwork. The bear didn't even flinch. It was already 2 steps away. Victor realized he wouldn't have time to fire again. He threw away the now useless rifle and pulled a long hunting knife from his belt. It was a desperate move, a knife against a ton of fury. He held it out in front of him as Misha threw his entire weight on top of him. Man and beast rolled across the floor in smoke and the crackling of burning fur. Victor let out a short, gurgling cry. Sasha saw only a flash of brown fur, the glint of the knife, and dark spots of blood. He couldn't tell who had won. The smoke stung his eyes. It was impossible to breathe. Outside, the blizzard continued to howl, trapping them in this small, log-built hell. Yegor Matveyevich, watching the struggle, strained all his strength. He jerked his bound hands. The old rope dug into his wrists, but gave way. Another tug, the knot loosened. He wasn't thinking about himself. He saw that Misha was wounded. He saw the handle of Victor's knife sticking out of his side. The bear roared in pain, trying to get the poacher's mangled body out from under him. Yegor had to help. He had to save his friend. Freeing one hand, he immediately began to untie the other. At that moment, Sasha came out of his stupor. His instinct for self-preservation took over. An exit. He needed an exit. He rushed to the door, threw it open, and stepped into the blinding whiteness of the blizzard. The wind immediately knocked him off his feet. He crawled, unable to see anything, choking on snow and terror. He ran. He ran from the bear, from the fire, from the dead bodies of his accomplices. He didn't know where he was running. He just ran into nowhere, into the icy heart of the storm. Meanwhile, in the hut, the fight was over. Victor Kromoy lay on the floor, pinned down by the bear's carcass. He was no longer screaming. Misha got up with difficulty. He was staggering. Blood flowed profusely from his wounded paw and from his side, where the knife was sticking out. He took a few steps and collapsed on the floor at the feet of Yegor, who had just freed his hands. The old man fell to his knees beside him. "Misha, Misha," he whispered, trying to stop the bleeding with a rag. The bear was breathing heavily, a string of bloody saliva hanging from his mouth. He laid his huge head on the old man's knees and whimpered softly and plaintively. Just like many years ago, when Yegor found him, a small, frightened bear cub, next to the body of his dead mother. At that moment, the roof of the hut, which had burned through above the stove, collapsed with a deafening crash, showering everything with sparks and burning embers. The fire, now fed by oxygen, roared with renewed vigor. Yegor raised his head. He was trapped. Outside was icy death. Inside was fiery death. And on his knees, his only friend was dying. Adrenaline, caused by mortal danger, has a terrible property. It recedes suddenly, leaving only emptiness and pain behind. Yegor Matveyevich felt this to the fullest when the collapsed roof showered him with sparks. His strength left him. He looked at the fire consuming his house, his past, his whole life, and felt nothing but a ringing silence in his ears. But then Misha whimpered again, and that sound brought the old man back to life. It wasn't just a house. It was a nest that he had to protect. And now he had to save the only living creature left in that nest. He tore a piece of his shirt and pressed it hard against the wound in the bear's side, trying to stop the bleeding. "Hush, Mishka, hush," he whispered, though the words stuck in his throat from the acrid smoke. "We'll leave now. Do you hear me? We'll leave this place." But how? The front door was already engulfed in flames. The window Kolyan had broken was too narrow for the beast's enormous body. They were trapped in a fiery bag. Yegor looked around frantically. The smoke stung his eyes, and it was impossible to breathe. Then his gaze fell on a hole in the wall. The very hole through which Misha had broken into the hut from his den. It was their only chance. "Misha, get up," he shouted, trying to drown out the roar of the fire. "Get up, we have to go." But the bear did not respond. He lay with his head on his paws, breathing heavily and intermittently. The pain and loss of blood were sapping his strength. He was giving up. "No." Yegor slammed his fist on the floor. "I won't leave you. Do you hear me? I won't leave you." He jumped to his feet and began to pull the animal by the scruff of his neck. It was like trying to move a mountain. The old man coughed, gasping for breath, his muscles screaming with the strain. But he did not give up. He pulled, pushed, begged. "Misha, remember how I found you? Small, alone. You survived then, and you'll survive now. Get up." He didn't know if the beast understood his words, but he put all his will, all his love for this creature into them. And the bear heard him, not the words. He heard the voice of his human, the voice that had been with him his whole life. Misha began to rise with a muffled groan. First on his front paws, then, pulling up his wounded hind leg, he slowly stood up. He staggered like a drunk. Every step was incredibly difficult for him. Yegor put his shoulder under the bear's huge side, trying to help, even though his own legs were barely holding him up. "That's it, son. That's it, slowly, he whispered, guiding the beast toward the breach. They moved through a fiery hell. Burning beams fell from the ceiling. The heat was so intense that it felt like their skin was about to catch fire. They reached the breach. Misha squeezed his way out with difficulty into his cold, dark den. Yegor jumped out after him. There was less smoke here, but the fire was already beginning to spread. Just a little more, Misha, just a little more. The old man groped for the back wall of the extension, which he had once deliberately made thinner in case they had to get out quickly. He leaned his shoulder against the boards. The old wood creaked and gave way. A gust of icy wind and snow hit his face. They were outside, free from the fire, but they had fallen from one trap into another. The blizzard did not subside. It howled like thousands of hungry wolves. Misha took a few steps through the deep snow, leaving a dark, bloody trail behind him, and collapsed. He could no longer walk. He buried his muzzle in the snow and fell silent. Yegor knelt down beside him. He tried to shield the animal from the wind with his body, but it was useless. The wind penetrated to the bone. His clothes, wet with sweat and melted snow, instantly began to cover with an icy crust. Yegor looked back. His home, his hut, had turned into a giant bonfire in the middle of a white desert. This bonfire gave light, but no heat. It was a funeral pyre for his entire past life, and perhaps for both of them. Yegor hugged Misha's huge head, pressing himself against his warm fur, which was already beginning to cool. "Forgive me, Misha," he whispered. "Forgive me. I couldn't save you." He closed his eyes. He was too old, too exhausted. He had no strength left to fight. He would just stay here with his friend until the very end. At the same time, a kilometer away from the burning hut, Sasha Orlov was making his way through the snowy hell. He ran while he still had the strength, and then he just walked, stumbling and falling. He couldn't see anything in front of him. The whole world had turned into a roaring, icy whiteness. He lost his direction and lost track of time. The cold numbed his body. He could no longer feel his fingers or toes. His thoughts were confused, turning into a sticky jelly. He thought about his mother, about how she would never get the medicine, about how he would die here in this snow, and his body would only be found in the spring. He fell again, face down in a snowdrift, and had no strength left to get up. Let it be. It's even better this way. Just fall asleep and feel nothing anymore. He was already beginning to sink into a warm, inviting slumber when his outstretched hand stumbled upon something hard and cold under the snow. He ran his numb fingers indifferently over the object. Metal, smooth, curved. A track, a snowmobile track. It was like an electric shock. His mind cleared. The snowmobile. They had left it here when they went to the hut. This was his chance, his only last chance for salvation. Gathering the last of his willpower, Sasha began to dig the vehicle out from under the snow. His hands wouldn't obey him. His fingers were like wood. He tore his nails, scratched his frozen skin, but continued to dig. He dug out the steering wheel, the seat. There it was, the key in the ignition. Hope, fragile and desperate, flared in his chest. He turned the key. Nothing lit up on the dashboard. The battery was dead, completely frozen. Sasha was overcome with despair. He punched the frozen seat with his fist. It was all for nothing. Everything was for nothing. But then he remembered. Victor always said that in the cold, you had to start the car with a manual starter. He fumbled for the cord handle. It was icy cold. He grabbed it with both hands, which he could hardly feel anymore, and pulled. The cord barely moved. The engine was frozen. The oil had thickened to the consistency of grease. "Come on, come on, come on," Sasha whispered, or rather wheezed. He braced his feet, tensed all the muscles in his exhausted body, and pulled again. With enormous effort, he managed to pull the cord all the way out. The engine coughed dully and fell silent. But it was a sound. The sound of life in the midst of dead silence. It gave him strength. He pulled again, and again. He felt no pain, no cold. He was obsessed with one thought: to start it. He had to live. He couldn't die here. Not like that. He paused, gathering the last crumbs of strength that still remained in his body. He knew that this might be his last attempt. He wrapped the cord around his mitten so that his hand wouldn't slip, and pulled. He pulled like he had never pulled anything in his life. With a desperate, wild cry that was immediately swallowed up by the blizzard. And on the ashes, next to the body of his huge friend, Yegor Matveyevich felt Misha's breathing become very rare and shallow. The wound on his side was almost stopped bleeding. The blood was freezing right on his fur. The old man pressed his ear to the powerful chest. The heart. He could still hear its beats. Dull, slow, fading, like the footsteps of a life slipping away. "Hang in there, son," he whispered. And an icy tear rolled down his wrinkled cheek, freezing instantly. "Just hang on a little longer." The bear jerked his head one last time and opened his eyes, which no longer held fury, but only pain and endless devotion. He looked at his human. And at that very moment, through the howling wind, a distant, barely discernible sound reached the old man's ears. A sound that should not have been in this dead taiga. Ragged, uncertain, but unmistakable. The sound of a running engine. A snowmobile engine. It had started, and that sound meant one thing. One of them had survived. And he was there, in the darkness. And he could come back. The sound of a running engine was the most beautiful and most terrifying thing Sasha Orlov had ever heard in his life. Beautiful because it meant life, warmth, a chance to escape this icy hell. Terrifying because it shattered the silence in which he could hide and made him, Sasha, the only living person for miles around. The only one who knew what had happened in that cursed hut. He clung to the handlebars with his frozen fingers, feeling the vibration of the machine reverberate through every bone in his body. Forward. Only forward. Away from the fire, the blood, the dead bodies. He turned the snowmobile around, heading into the dark, roaring mouth of the taiga. He drove 10 meters, 20. The headlights caught only flying snowflakes and black tree trunks in the blizzard. He was free. He had escaped. And at that moment, he stopped. He couldn't. Something inside him, something that Victor and Kolyan had long since killed in themselves, prevented him from leaving. He saw the old man's face before his eyes. Not angry, not frightened. Tired and full of contempt. He heard his voice. "Leave before it's too late." He remembered how he had shouted, "Misha," trying to protect his pet. They had broken into his house. They wanted to rob him. They had killed his only friend. And he, Sasha, had been with them. He had been an accomplice. If he left now, he would become just like Victor. He would spend the rest of his life running away from that night. From himself. He slammed his fist on the steering wheel. Tears froze on his cheeks. He didn't know what to do. Going back was madness. Someone else might still be alive there. A wounded, enraged beast might be waiting for him there. But leaving was even worse. With a cry of despair, he turned the snowmobile around and drove back. Not knowing why, not knowing what he would do there, simply because he couldn't do otherwise. Yegor Matveyevich heard that the sound of the engine was not fading away, but growing louder. He slowly raised his head. A single yellow eye peered through the wall of snow. It was getting closer. The old man understood everything. The one who survived was coming back. Why? To leave no witnesses. It made sense. Victor would have done the same. So the most dangerous one had survived. Yegor struggled to his feet. His old body protested, but his will was stronger than steel. He looked around for a weapon. Nearby lay a charred, heavy ember thrown out of the fire. He picked it up. It wasn't much of a defense, but it was better than nothing. He stood over Misha's head, his legs spread wide. He would meet his death standing up, defending what was dear to him. He looked at the approaching light, and there was no fear in his blue eyes, only icy determination. He had lived a long life, and it was not a bad ending for an old forester. The snowmobile stopped 10 meters away. The engine died. There was almost complete silence, broken only by the howling wind and the smoldering remains of the hut. In the light of the headlights, the scene looked apocalyptic. The black skeleton of the log cabin. 2 dark, motionless bodies, already beginning to be covered with snow. And the tall, stooped figure of an old man with a club in his hand, standing over the giant, bloodied body of a bear. Sasha slowly climbed off the snowmobile. He raised his hands to show that they were empty. He began, but his voice broke. He took a step forward. The old man did not move, only gripped his improvised club more tightly. I didn't want any of this, Sasha finally managed to say. I needed the money. For my mother. He spoke, and his words seemed silly and insignificant against the backdrop of the tragedy that had unfolded here. Yegor looked at him silently. He didn't see a murderer in front of him. He saw a boy scared to death, a boy who had returned even though he could have run away. Why? Conscience? Or was he up to something? Are they dead? Yegor asked hoarsely, nodding toward the hut. The big one, yes. Sasha nodded, unable to look at Kolyan's body. And the second one, the lame one, the bear. He was on top. He fell silent. Yegor understood. Victor was dead too. Only the 2 of them remained, and the dying bear. The old man slowly lowered the torch. The battle was over. Now another war was beginning. A war against the cold, a war against time. Help me, said Yegor. His voice was dry and commanding. It was not a request. It was an order from a man accustomed to giving orders in his world. Sasha did not understand. How? What can I do? He's still alive. Yegor knelt down next to Misha. But he'll die, from the cold in his wounds, if we leave him here. Sasha looked at the huge carcass of the beast, at the dried blood on its fur. This beast had just torn 2 people to pieces, and the old man spoke of it with such tenderness as if it were a child. But what can we do? He stammered. He needs warmth, said Igor, without taking his eyes off the bear. And he needs peace. He raised his head and looked into the darkness, where the outlines of old fir trees could be seen behind the wall of the blizzard. There, 2 kilometers from here, by the stream. There's an old winter hut, a hunter's hut. It's small, but there's a stove and firewood. We have to drag him there. Sasha thought he had misheard, or that the old man had gone mad with grief. Get him there? Him? He pointed at the bear. But he weighs half a ton. We won't be able to move him. We will, Yegor said stubbornly. With a tarp from the snowmobile, we'll tie him to the machine and drag him, slowly. The plan was insane, absolutely impossible. dragging such a monster through deep snow, in a blizzard. He'll wake up and kill me, Sasha said, remembering the rage in the beast's eyes. He won't wake up, Yegor replied quietly. He's too weak, and he won't touch you if I'm around. He trusts me. He looked Sasha straight in the eye, and his gaze held all the weight of the world. You'll help me. You have to. It happened because of the three of you. The one with the knife and the one with the fire have already paid. Now it's your turn to pay the price, not with money. With action. Sasha recoiled. The old man's words hit him like a slap in the face. He was right. He, Sasha Orlov, was to blame. He had come here with a weapon. He had stood and watched as his accomplices broke into someone else's house. His silence, his cowardice, had made him an accomplice to murder. And now this old man was offering him not punishment, but atonement. The strangest, most terrifying, and most impossible atonement imaginable. He looked at the old man, at his determined, emaciated face. Then at the bear. Its huge, motionless body seemed like a mountain of flesh and fur. But at that moment, the beast twitched its ear weakly and let out a quiet, plaintive moan. It was still alive. And its life now depended on him, Sasha, on his decision. Run and save his skin, or stay and try to save his soul by doing the impossible. A decision made in desperation leaves no time for reflection. It requires immediate action. Sasha, driven by a new, unfamiliar sense of duty, removed the canvas cover from the snowmobile. Together with the old man, they dragged it over to the bear. Now came the most impossible part: moving the carcass, weighing several hundred kilograms, onto the canvas. Grab the front paws, Yegor commanded. I'll take the back ones. We'll pull on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. They leaned in. Sasha felt every muscle in his body screaming from the inhuman strain. The bear moved a centimeter. It was hellish, Sisyphean labor. They pulled, rested, pulled again. The snow beneath them turned red. Sasha felt neither cold nor fatigue. He was a machine, carrying out the orders of this stern old man who, despite being over 70, worked with the tenacity and strength of a young man. After half an hour, which seemed like an eternity, they managed to drag the beast onto the tarpaulin. Tying the ends of the tarpaulin to the snowmobile, Sasha got behind the wheel. Gently, said Yegor, sitting down in the back and holding Misha's head. No jerks. Pull it like a sled. Sasha gently pressed the gas pedal. The engine roared, the tracks turned, but the snowmobile did not move. It was too heavy. More, shouted the old man. Sasha pressed the gas pedal harder. The machine jerked and the taut ropes creaked. Slowly, inch by inch, the improvised sled crept through the snow. Their journey was torturous. They moved at walking speed. Every 100 meters, the snowmobile got stuck in deep snow, and they had to get out and push. The blizzard did not subside, trying to knock them off course. Yegor was their compass. He unerringly led them through the white fog, navigating by landmarks known only to him. Sasha was silent. He just did what needed to be done. He pushed, pulled, and steered. He was no longer a poacher. He was no longer a debtor. He was a rescuer. And this strange new feeling gave him strength. After 2 hours that seemed to stretch on forever, Yegor said, "We're here." Sasha saw nothing but a wall of trees. But as they got closer, he saw a log cabin frozen into a snowdrift. A winter hut. It was old and crooked, but it was a shelter. The exhausting work began again. They dug out the door and dragged the bear inside. The small room, which barely accommodated the three of them, was as cold as it was outside. while Sasha, on Yegor's orders, lit the cast-iron stove. The old man examined Misha's wounds. He worked calmly, like a surgeon in an operating room. "Water," he said curtly. Sasha heated some snow in a pot. Yegor tore off a clean piece of his undershirt, dipped it in boiling water, and began to carefully wash the wound on the paw. The bullet had gone through, shattering the bone. That was bad. But even worse was the wound in his side. Victor's knife had gone in deep, and the handle had broken off. The blade remained inside. "I need light, and hold it," said Yegor. Sasha, overcoming his fear, sat down next to the beast's huge head and wrapped his arms tightly around it. He felt hot, ragged breath on his face. The bear was unconscious, but its body sometimes trembled with pain. Igor took his hunting knife, heated it red-hot in the stove fire, cooled it in boiling water, and leaned over the wound. "Hold on tight, kid," he warned. Sasha closed his eyes. He could only hear the crackling of the wood in the stove and the eerie, wet sounds the knife made in the animal's body. The old man worked with his gnarled, firm fingers with incredible precision. He felt something, and a moment later dropped the bloody piece of steel onto the floor with a clang. The blade. He pulled it out. Then Yegor took a bunch of dry grass that Sasha couldn't identify from an old bag hanging on the wall. The old man ground it into powder, mixed it with hot water, and applied the paste to the wound, tying it tightly with the remains of his shirt. The operation was complete. They sat in silence, in a small island of warmth in the middle of an icy ocean. Misha lay motionless, his breathing steady but weak. "Will he survive?" Sasha asked quietly. "I don't know," Yegor replied honestly, looking at the fire in the stove. "I did everything I could. Now it's up to him and the taiga. It will either take him or let him go." He paused, then began to tell the story about how he found a small crying bear cub next to the body of its mother, killed by hunters like them, seeking easy money. About how he fed it goat's milk from a bottle, how they grew up together, and how the animal became closer to him than any human being. He talked, and Sasha listened, and for the first time in his life, he fully understood what they had done. They hadn't just come to the old man's house. They had invaded a family and tried to destroy it. 3 days passed. The blizzard subsided. Misha was alive. He didn't get up, but his fever had broken, and he began to drink the water that Yegor brought him. On the 4th day, the old man took an old radio out of the corner and turned the knob for a long time, trying to catch a signal. Finally, he got a response. He briefly reported that there had been an attack on his farm, that there were casualties, and that he was in a spare winter hut. A day later, a helicopter appeared over the forest. It brought the local police officer and 2 employees of the Ministry of Emergency Situations. They saw an incredible sight: an old forester, a young man, and a huge wounded bear lying peacefully by the stove. Sasha told them everything, without hiding anything. About duty, about Victor, about the attack, about how the bear protected his owner, and how they then rescued him. Yegor confirmed every word he said. Sasha Orlov was tried for poaching and complicity in robbery. But his sincere confession and the testimony of Yegor Kuzmich, who told how the young man risked his life to save him and the bear, were taken into account by the court as mitigating circumstances. He received the minimum sentence. Yegor Matveyevich and Misha returned to the ruins. With the help of the authorities and caring people who heard about this story, by the following winter, a new hut stood on the site of the burned one. Misha limped for a long time, but the powerful body of the beast took its toll. He survived. Their life returned to its former course, becoming a local legend. A legend about an old man and a bear who were family, and about how even in the darkest heart there is room for an act that can change everything. Final shots. Yegor sits on the threshold of his new home. Next to him, with his head on his knees, lies a huge brown bear with a scar on his side. Together, they watch the setting sun. The taiga has forgiven them and given them a second chance. Not only them, but also the guy who once made the right choice between saving his life and saving his soul. Did Sasha deserve forgiveness? Or does his help not cancel out the fact that he was one of the poachers?